Okay, this one is on the real story of God, Jesus, Mary, and the angels, devil, Satan, etc.
Oh, I love it.
They want to know what your take is on it.
Um,
And I've had more than one person. I didn't have a name for this one because I've had two or three people
yeah.
send in similar questions.
Okay. Let's start with the big one, God. There is something out there. I shouldn't say it that way. There is something in us that is the God within. It's the source of your existence, of everybody's existence. When you come face to face with that, it's not anything, there's nothing to describe. There's nothing there except this feeling of bliss, absolutely orgasmic bliss. It is a love that is so deep and so filling and so satisfying that you don't need anything from this world at all. If you're in that God state, you're filled up, you're complete. So I have experienced that a number of times. And there's just not anything more that you can say about that. Okay, what's the next thing on the list?
Um, Talking about Jesus, Mary, the angels, the devil, Satan, and
Okay, so the God state, let's go back to the God state for just a moment. That is a form of energy known as love. Okay, so and in a little more technical term, the God state is characterized by what I call mind space. Mind is the awareness property of space, and space is um, uh, the location aspect of mind. Okay, and that condition is absolutely silent, still, and unmoving. There's no sense of movement. There's no sense of self. There's no sense of a world or anything. When you're in mind space, you're basically in the God state. When that changes and that God state starts to vibrate, you move into what I call consciousness and energy. So right there, you move from oneness or the God state into duality. It's a wonderful move because duality makes everything possible. So now we have this world of possibilities, many, many, many worlds of possibilities. So, and consciousness is the motion of the energy and or let me say that again. Consciousness is the feeling of state of energy, and energy is the motion of consciousness. So now you've got this consciousness and energy. And whether you're a scientist and you're only paying attention to the energetic half of that equation, or whether you're a mystic and you're only paying attention to the consciousness aspect of that, they both work together. They're both two sides of one coin. So now we have this whole bunch of energy. What was formerly this gigantic cosmic silence and bliss has now become this churning, moving state, or I call it pot of soup. Somebody is stirring the soup and it's making waves. Okay, so you have the energies, depending on how they move and what direction they move in, et cetera, you get certain actions, certain feelings. Some of that movement can be in alignment with what we call that bliss, and some of it can be the opposite of that, breaking that bliss down. So what has come out of those two possible states of being, whether you're building bliss or taking bliss apart to return it to its state of silence and quiet bliss, you have this world of all these dynamics that are happening. What has happened is the stories that have come through the Bible to describe that, to help people remember the dynamics. And we have the story of Adam and Eve, God created by God. And then we have Satan. And Satan, he's a bad boy. Okay. So you have these two forces now, humanity, and they're trying to build something that's godlike. And then you have this force called Satan, and people put 59,000 labels on that. Comes down to that's bad, that's evil, that's Satan, that's the devil. So depending on what culture you're in, you're going to have a whole bunch of words that describe that destructive aspect of energy, and a whole bunch of words that describe the constructive aspect of energy. And that then leads to stories like, Jesus and Mary, etc. So there was a long period of time. Let's go to the topic of Jesus. I did not believe in somebody named Jesus. After a lot, I talked about this, I think it was in volume 3, Consciousness and Energy, volume 3. I went through a really rough period, tough, really critical examination of everything, because my whole world had come apart. All the glue that was holding it together it all died in 1 year. First, my mother died, and then my hero died, and then my religion died. And it was like, they've lied. They lied about everything. The only thing that wasn't a lie was my mother, and she wasn't there to help. So I had this terrible crisis of examining, okay, let's get real. What's really real? And so I started doing a deep dive, and I admit it, I don't think there was a Jesus. But what came out of that research was the realization that there was a group in Toronto, I don't know when it was, early 1900s, early half of the 1900s maybe, or somewhere in there. This group had come together and they said, if consciousness is so creative, let's see what we can create. We're going to create a new form of Jesus. And so they gathered in this apartment every week for months, and they meditated on envisioning this young man coming up, very mystical, very intelligent. They gave him a name. I think they named him Philip. And they gave him all the gifts of consciousness, and they gave him a date of birth, and they gave him a date of death. And he was 26 years old at the age of his death. And they continued to communicate. And pretty soon, out of their experiment, they freaked themselves out, because Philip came to life and began to interact to the point that he could move physical objects. And at some point in there, and here's a caveat when you're creating, if you're creating and you haven't done all of the work within yourself to eliminate old angers, old biases, old fears, old injustices, feelings of injustice, those are going to be embedded in what you are creating. And they may be very, let's use a genetic term, they may be very recessive traits, but they're in there. And that same concept was shown in 2001, A Space Odyssey. They programmed this lovely AI computer, and they got out in space, and what happened? The AI computer began to take over, and it killed the people on board, all of them, and aborted the mission. So that something similar happened with Philip. And one day, I don't know what the whole story was, but one day the group either tried to control Philip, or there was a disagreement or whatever. And Philip picked up the table and went chasing after some of the people in the room. And at that point, they scared themselves half to death, and they abandoned the artifact. They abandoned the effort to create a new Jesus, a new form of Jesus. But what does that experiment tell us about the power of consciousness? If you just set aside the fact that we create other versions of ourselves every time we imagine ourselves doing something different somewhere else than where we are at, we're literally creating that version of ourselves. But just take that whole concept and say, what happens when you have 8 billion, or let's say, what is it? The church, the Christian church has maybe 1 or 2 billion people who believe in Jesus, who believe in the whole story around Jesus. What are they doing? Every time they think about him, pray to him, talk to him, they are strengthening that aspect of this creation that they have created. Now, so that's where my research took me. It was like, it doesn't matter whether there was a real Jesus or not. We've got somebody, some incredible creation that we have created working for our benefit. And people call on Jesus, and I have done that and had miracles. I won't go into that now, but have had miracles happen, like boom, from death to life instantly.
Yeah, you've mentioned that in your classes before, that Jesus appeared to you and helped you.
I've had conversations with him face to face with somebody that looks just like I would imagine Jesus looks. So all that aside, there are people on record who were known as a Jesus, because in the ancient days, in the days before the history got torqued around and twisted and, lied about, there were people, the focus on humanity, the focus of communities was to raise people to higher consciousness. And they raised people to higher consciousness. And when they reached that higher consciousness and they could heal, they could communicate with animals and bugs and the weather and one another. They were intuitive, very intuitive. They were precognitive. They had all these gifts that then earned them the title of a Jesus. A Jesus was a title. It wasn't an individual. And so there's a big argument that has never been settled in the church that that there was a real physical Jesus. Well, I think there were probably a whole bunch of them. It would be like the local doctor or the local dentist, really, really good at some sort of healing or some sort of dream interpretation or some sort of intuitive stuff. And that's who the townspeople went to when they needed, some help, or they needed some insight or whatever.
So there's two titles there then. So if Jesus was a title, was he a title for the teacher?
Yeah, he was called the teacher healer.
Okay. And then there's also where we've called him Jesus Christ. Now, isn't Christ a title for Christ consciousness?
Yes.
And what does that mean?
That just means that somebody reached that state in which they experienced enlightenment. A moment of enlightenment is it's a moment when you are one with everything, and you're still aware of your physical self, but it's hard. You can't really describe that either. But I've heard other people describe what they experienced. They've written about it. A few gurus have written about it. A few people. Lama Surya Das was one of the people that was just walking along the road or the sidewalk one day, walking down the street. And this was in the 1900s. And all of a sudden, everything, he became one with everything. He knew everything. Those are very, very high states of consciousness. And when you get in those high states of consciousness, everything responds to you. the birds, the animals, the houses, the weather, everything responds to you. And you're in this state of bliss, but you're not in the full bliss of the Godhead. You're in a state of full enlightenment. You can see that you are a light being, a generator of light, which is roughly 60 feet in diameter, clearly golden light. And so those kinds of states of being, once somebody hit that or triggered that, they would be different afterwards, because the further up you go in terms of being able to reach higher frequencies, the more your brain is rewired. So long story short, back to Consciousness and Energy, Volume 3, and my several years of absolute, I'm tired of this crap. I don't believe anything anymore. I'm going to show that it's all a bunch of, BS. What came out of that was this realization of this is how we created a Jesus. There was a fellow in the 14th century, and I forget what his name was, King Louis something or other, something like that. He had reached that state and he was put to death.
Oh,
and
wow.
he was put to death by the church because he was refusing to go along with the church. and and so it was a very political death, and they built a whole story around that. I'm not sure, but the work of who's the Russian scientist who's put all the series of books, history, fiction, or science, science or fiction. I'd have to go back and look up his name. I always think I'm going to remember that name, but he has done a whole bunch of research and has said that the guy that they used as a pattern for the whole story of Jesus was this king in the 14s or 1500s, and that he was very powerful, beloved by everybody, and it was very upsetting. And so the church built this whole story afterwards about the story of Jesus, Mary, and Joseph, and created this whole thing. It was not a king, it was a poor guy, who reached this state of power. And that was supposed to inspire people that, you could be poverty stricken and really low consciousness, but you could achieve this magical enlightenment. And they moved the base of that whole event from the Eastern Europe region to Italy to then Bethlehem.
Okay.
And so, we don't know what the true story is, but.
So that guy, his name is History, Fiction, or Science, is Dr. Anatoly Fomenko?
Yes, that's it.
Okay.
Anatoly Fomenko. So my whole idea of God, Jesus, Mary, Joseph, angels, devils, saints, etc., is I'm very comfortable using those terms, but I have a very different perception of what's going on in the background and of the stories. And when you look at the story of Genesis, you can see that that is a story made up to demonize women. I don't want to, okay. I analyzed that in Consciousness and Energy, Volume 3. How effective that whole Genesis story was in bringing down the matriarchal society. They needed some sort of propaganda to make the women were in power back then in the matriarchy, and they got corrupt. They got corrupted in the same way that the male patriarchy is corrupt right now. So that really, the Hebrew people, I think they're off on a tangent somewhere. So, and I don't know of any Hebrew people right now. All those people over in the Middle East, those are mostly, well, some of them are literally Arabs, and the rest are from Ukraine, the Ukraine area. So, yeah. So we're really being fed a whole, story.
Okay,
that,
so what do you think then about Mary?
you mean about her existence?
Yeah.
Yeah, I, I, this is very personal. So, um, there was a woman who gave birth to one of the people who became a Jesus, but I think and that's, I'm not even sure of that particular fact, but there was a woman who had reached that high state of Jesus consciousness, Christ consciousness, and that was Mary Magdalene. And that she was part of the what I'll call the story that tried to denigrate and take power away from women, and the she wasn't. They've got the story so convoluted that it's really hard to know what is the truth. But from my point of view, there was a woman, Mary Magdalene, Mary of Magdalene, who became a very, very powerfully awake and wise woman in the old tradition of the matriarchy. She was married to John the Baptist. He was killed. She went kind of undercover. She ended up marrying Jesus. They had, I think there were several children with John the Baptist, and maybe one or two or three with Jesus. And so that whole story is not well understood. We don't have all the details. I don't know how much of that is true, but I keep coming up with the same few factors again and again. There was a woman. She was married to John the Baptist. He was beheaded for the same reason Jesus was killed. She married Jesus. She was a woman who drew attention. So whoever she married, was like, oh, that's unfortunate.
Yeah,
So
some of the stories too say that she was of royalty, and they said that Jesus' line was from royalty too, in some of the stories we've
well,
heard.
maybe, I don't know, but there's, the only thing that I know for sure is that the story put out by the church, the Catholic Church, the Christian churches, is not historically accurate. It's a lovely story, and it's led to all kinds of traditions and etc. But it's not historically true. It's something that is beautiful in its own way. I go along with the Christmas things just because everybody else does, and I love the idea of gift giving,
Mhm.
exchanging gifts. It's symbolic of all of the gifts that every individual has a gift, and the reality takes shape based on what the gift is that we are giving, that we're contributing to the reality. And 8 billion gifts coming in every day. This is what we get. It could use a little tweaking right now, but generally speaking, it is just an amazing reality. Amazing. And I think it's about to become much more amazing. So, yeah.
So if we go back to the whole Jesus, and I know we just talked about Mary Magdalene, but I was actually wondering about Mary, Joseph and Mary that were supposed to be his parents. So they were asking about Mary, his mother.
Okay. Oh, that Mary. Okay. I don't know. I don't know enough about her whole story to even say anything.
And the
I
whole
have,
virgin birth and all that other stuff that the
that's one of the things that I took to task. It's like, who ever heard of a virgin giving birth? I mean, what kind of story is that? How gullible do you have to be to believe that? Um, so Flamenco has come up with a whole different scenario. Mary originally lived in Italy, and she was visited by, and there are stories now starting to come out, some sort of Roman, I don't know if he was a soldier or or what he was, but some sort of Roman higher up in the Roman hierarchy. And that's how she got pregnant. And I don't know if that's true, but yeah, I just
Okay.
know that the story that the church has put out about Mary is not true. However, there is an amazing presence that shows up every so often in terms of making miracles happen. And that is often cited as the mother, Mary, the mother of Jesus.
Okay. Mary of Fatima.
Yeah, or
Yeah.
Lourdes.
Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah. There's I think the story of Saint Bernadette is another story. There's all kinds of stories. The
Okay.
fact that is trying to be hidden, the fact that the thing that the church keeps trying to hide is the higher consciousness. They have not wanted people to get into that higher consciousness because it blows their story apart. And it's like, guys, we can still go to church. We can still enjoy the stories. We don't have to shut down the consciousness. People can, they're more versatile than the church is wanting to admit. And, I don't know anybody that's willing to give up Christmas.
Right. Right.
Yeah.
And there's so many different ways we can take this because there's so many different stories out there
Right.
in each religion. So
Yep.
I don't want to go there any further with Jesus, Mary, and Joseph. What I would like to do is go to the dark side now.
Okay. All
So,
right.
um,
Is this a
we've had
separate?
this. No, it's part of the same thing, kind of like we've talked a little bit about Satan and the devil and that,
Oh, yeah.
but not enough about that. But I want to just deviate just a little bit. You've talked
Gonna be a
before
deviant, huh?
about demons, and you said there aren't, if I understood correctly, you said there aren't really any demons. They're something within ourselves. So when people feel that they're being attacked by demons, or it is their job to get rid of these demons, what do you say about that?
Well, let's go back to the beginning of demons. So demons are a form of energy. You and I are forms of energy. Everybody, the dog, the cat, the tree, the flowers, the wind, everything is energy. And all of the energy in a given world is using a very congruent set of frequencies within a specific range of frequencies. And they happen to be very harmonically interlaced. So they work together really pretty well. However, the complement to that is the energy of that is moving in the opposite direction. So an example in the world of science, when you get amino acids, when you buy a bottle of amino acids, you'll see it says L-methionine or L-tyrosine or L-lysine. That means that amino acid formula, those molecules have a left-hand spin. It's counterclockwise. Counterclockwise is a very magnetic spin. Everything is frequency, and frequency is a spin.
Okay.
So we probably should have said that before. But so if it's a left-hand spin, it's going to build form. If it's a right-hand spin, it's going to explode form. It's going to deteriorate form. It's going to take that apart. So that same concept holds true all the way up. And you get this frequency of harmonics, and then you get their opposite, which in the world of science they call antimatter. And it
Okay.
is just energy. And that energy holds forms, just like us,
Mhm.
and substances that have the opposite spin. And they're not very compatible. They're legitimate, but they're not compatible as long as they stay in their own world. Okay. When you start getting a crossover, when you get some enterprising beings from that other form of energy who want control or want to expand their sense of control into regions that they have no business and no compatibility with, then they invade, or they can be felt, They can be heard. Sometimes they can be seen. I'll give an example. Well, I don't know that this is really a good example. No, maybe I won't. Well, I'll just say this. When my father was at the end stage of life, he was having congestive heart failure. And he said that one of his episodes, he's sitting in his chair watching TV after dinner, and all of a sudden his heart goes crazy and he couldn't get any breath, couldn't. And he said all of a sudden the room started getting darker. He said across the room, coming right through the wall, he could see this dark hooded figure, tall, wearing all black, couldn't see the face. And he said it scared the heck out of him. The dog was going crazy, just barking his head off as soon as that figure appeared through the wall. My mother is over at the kitchen sink and she's like, what the heck is going on? She's looking at the dog. She sees my dad starting to fold up. My mother had magic fingers. She would go over and run her fingers up and down my father's spine, and his heart would straighten out. It
Oh,
would
wow.
start beating correctly. And then she'd go back to doing her dishes. But my dad said that that form, he said that seemed to him to be the height of evil. It wasn't really evil. It was just the opposite of what the life forces here are used to. And if that form of energy can capture your energy before you move into the light, then voila, it's got some more energy at its fingertips, at its disposal.
Okay.
So there are these forms that we would consider evil. What's the name of the little girl that was Doyle? I forget what her first name was. There's a story that's known in among the demon literature of a little girl who was very normal until she was maybe, I don't know, 7, 8. And then all of a sudden she changed dramatically, and animals were frightened of her. She knew what they were thinking, all kinds of stuff happened. So long story short, that's a sign that this little girl was open and available. Somebody took over her energy. Some priest tried to come and exorcise her. He wasn't strong enough. In fact, she scared the bejabbers out of him in the midst of the exorcism when she started trying to exorcise his energy from him. So,
Oh my God.
yeah. So the whole, there's other stories of possession. I've read quite a few. And that whole idea of the dark side is that other side of life, that side that is operating. It interpenetrates our world because it's all in the same frequency range. But you just stay focused where you're at with love, in light. You don't go over there and invite, because once they have your location, then they don't let go very easily. And I knew somebody a few years ago who was a professor of physics in Texas, and she got curious about demons in the dark side, opened herself and couldn't close it again. And they harassed her. I think she's still alive. I'm not sure, but they harassed her to no end. And she was terrified after a while that I don't have control over this. I said, no, you should never have invited that. You don't want anything to do with that. Just ignore that. They don't have any power when you stay in your power. And so the dark side, there are people. So let's go to contemporary stuff. There are people here who align with that dark side, who invite that. And they're called Satanists, and they do all kinds of religious ceremonies that involve, instead of light and life and love, They involve the dark and death and hate. And they're here. They're trying to get more energy for their side. And unfortunately, it's just energy. But
Okay.
those people have been seriously taken over. I'm not sure if there's a fix for them, but
So you can't just close them out and say, you no longer serve me. Thank you for your service. Be gone.
you can't close out who? What service?
Well, if you feel like you've got an entity or something inside you that doesn't belong.
That's usually you.
Okay,
When let's say that, let's talk about miasmas for a moment.
that's the next thing I was going to ask you about.
Okay. So if you have an incident that happens when you're, I don't know, 14, and you're just so angry and feel so misunderstood, etc., and you never address that. You don't know how at 14. You don't have a language, etc. And so all of that, then that's a form of energy that you're now hanging on to. In order for energy to be exorcised within, you have to feel it until it dissipates. And sometimes there's an action that goes with that dissipation, and the action can scare people. But for most people, it's like a momentary, feeling of being totally consumed by that hurt, letting yourself feel that hurt, totally consumed by that anger, letting yourself feel that anger and letting go of it. If you let it build and fill, it dissipates. It doesn't have it, because anger is dissipative. It doesn't build. Okay. So when you hang on to it, then it becomes like this encapsulated area in your energy field. And since you're taking in energy from everywhere in the universe, it's going to block the intake in some part of your energy system. And that organ or set of organs or muscles or bones or whatever will be affected by that. So it ends up interfering, and you get some kind of problem, disease, breakdown, degeneration. So that miasma, you have to go back to that experience, and you have to literally feel that and let it dissipate, and then it goes away, and then healing often happens. So
Okay, because I was confused because there have been other times that I've had a discussion with you about demons, and I had thought that you said it was me, not me personally, but the person who had asked about it, that it was within that person and that they need to let it go. So could a demon be a miasma, or the thing that we were talking about a few minutes ago, which is an actual other energy trying to
that's
get
right.
into us?
Okay. So what happens in today's world is people use the term demon or Satan or devil too loosely. It's not real. A demon, a Satan, or a devil, or any of the other terms. Those are typically small time energies within the system of the individual that just have not been allowed to pass through. People are hanging on. They're resentful. They want to get even. They want to play the victim, and so they got to hang on to that hurt. They want to show their loyalty, so they hang on to some stupid rule that they grew up with, et cetera, et cetera. All of those are small time demons. They're not really demons. It's just misdirected energy in this reality system. A demon is something else, a real demon.
Okay, so we're getting the terminology mixed up is what it is, because
Right.
we're calling it a demon, but it's not really a demon.
That's right. And we're sloppy in that way.
Okay.
And that when you use that kind of terminology, you're kind of inviting that kind of problem. What's important for us is to be really conscious that what we speak about creates. And when you start using sloppy language, like he's a demon, she's a Satanist, she's got the devil in her, whatever, you are creating that and you're strengthening that, and you don't want to do that. It just makes more trouble for you down the line, especially if it's somebody you're in relationship with. Does
Okay.
that make sense?
Yeah, I think I'm getting the difference between it. So the demon energy that we were talking about in the very beginning thing, that was an energy that had a different spin that actually came into the person.
That's right. There
Okay.
are there's other names for them. Jinn.
Okay.
Um, I can't. The archons is another word. Um, all of those are terms that really acknowledge the fact that we know intuitively that there are other forms of life that are very dissipative, destructive, degenerative. They're explosive to our form of life. We don't want that. I mean, we can know that that exists over there, but it stays over there. And we don't want to engage or invite that in any way, shape, or form. And when we see incursions into our world, that's when really we need to, who's the weak point? Who's, that's,
Okay.
yeah, that's a big, there's a lot of things, a lot of fine tuning, I think, that we need as a people. And I know people want to just put one label on 25 different things and say, oh, yeah, that's what it is. And they don't discern the fine differences. And there are many fine differences when it comes to consciousness.
Okay, well, let's go back to the two terms, devil and Satan.
Okay.
And I think I know in the one books, the gods of the Bible, he talked about, who's it, Mario, I can't say his last name,
Yeah, I know who
oh,
you mean.
Bablino or Baglino or something.
Yeah, it's Bellino. The GL sound in Italian is
Yeah,
like a yell,
yeah, I
Bellino.
should know that.
Right. Somebody who is
Who
Italian
is
through,
Italian?
right.
All
Yeah.
right. So he had said that in his book, and it's been a while since I read it, that devil
Yep.
and Satan were titles.
Yeah, they were.
So
Yeah.
there's no actual one person that's the devil or no one person that's Satan.
No, that's a whole, that adds on to that whole thing. The devil in ancient times was the lawyer who was the opposition lawyer in a case. And he was the one who asked all the questions and demanded, answers for all kinds of investigative kinds of activities. What happened? What did you learn? What was the reason? What's the history? All of that. That was called the devil. That was the devil. you know, we could maybe just pretend or have fun with that lawyer thing nowadays, but that was a whole different connotation or use of that word. And that's, like I said, we have gotten sloppy with the word, with our language, and have failed to really understand that we're creating when we're
Oh
talking.
yeah, we've gotten really sloppy, and there are words that had a specific meaning that now have a totally different meaning.
Yeah,
So
right.
the Satan, is that the same thing as the devil then, as far as a title, or
Yeah, pretty much. Pretty much. Um, there's some fine things that I think we are going to adopt as we move into the future. But right now, the devil, Satan, um, archons, jinn, that's all in the same category. And if we focus there instead of focusing on what are we building over here in the light with love, for the future, for one another, then we're, whatever you focus on grows. So you
and
don't want to
creates.
focus on all that crap too much. And it's, people have said to me, well, how do you get down in, all those trenches and look at all that garbage going on and not be affected by that? Well, it's because I know what I want. I don't want that. I want to see what are they doing so I can help people
Create something
understand.
different.
Yeah, watch out for this, put some energy over here for that, and so on and so forth. Yeah.
Okay, then what about hell?
What about hell?
So there's no real place called hell then, right?
No,
Unless we create it.
that's right. I have seen several hell worlds. They are not good. They are not fun. But they are, I have to say, there's 99% of the people on the planet, 99.9, are really good people. And they're not going to hell. There is no hell. What you are thinking when you die is you're going to step out of the body and continue right on with that line of thinking. So don't be afraid. You're good at heart. Yes, maybe you had a hard life. Yes, maybe you had been treated unfairly, or maybe you had some things that you could have done better. That's true for all of us. We are evolving as a situation, as a civilization, and we're evolving toward higher consciousness, more expansive consciousness. So
And don't be afraid because you never really die.
no, you don't. Fortunately or unfortunately, you never really die. You just move from one world to the next, to the next, to the next. So the whole
So speak just
life,
a
the whole system of life is you come to life and you return to source, and you come to life and it's kind of like a big recycling system. It's beautiful.